Welcome back to the Fuse Show, everybody. My name is Jim, and I'm the co-founder of Xfusion.io and the co-host of the Fuse Show. I'm excited to be joined today by my guest, Fadl Tarzi. Fadl is the founder and CEO of Nexford University. He and his team are on a mission to solve the world's biggest challenge, education, by building a next-generation university that will positively impact millions of lives around the world. Fadl has 20 years of experience in building digital media and tech startups. So welcome, Fadl, and I want to jump right into this. So I understand that you've been an entrepreneur since 18. Is that fair to say?
Hi, Jim. It is fair.
Okay. So tell me, like, we're going to get into Nexford, and we'll probably talk a lot about that. But what was your first venture into entrepreneurship?
My first venture was a .com. It was a website back in Egypt where I grew up. So it was a website designed for sort of an Egyptian version of Expedia is the simplest way to explain it, to think of it. So Egypt relies heavily on tourism. So it was a website for people to be able to check out, hotels, airlines, where to go, and basically get the accurate information without being haggled on the streets.
Wow. So my first business was lawn care. So I think like a fairly common story, but I'm rather surprised that you got your start online then, right from the beginning.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That gives you more and more time for compounding to take effect as you kind of progress in your career.
Right.
Well, that's fun. So let's jump right into Nexford. Tell me a little bit more about what it is and the problem that you guys are solving.
So the problem we're solving predominantly is a belief that my co-founder and I have shared sort of from day one that, lack of education is the root cause of most, if not all, world challenges. We've just shared this belief from a social perspective. Like we've never, I had never built anything in the education sector before, but I had actually experienced challenges of higher ed from an employer perspective. So as an entrepreneur, you're hiring, you tend to hire a lot of fresh grads, and typically if you're building, a tech startup, you're typically hiring folks that haven't really done what they're going to be doing before. So you're having to train them from scratch. I was shocked, however, at the level of training that's required. So like really basic skills people weren't getting in school, basics from like Excel skills, the PowerPoint, even basic digital marketing skills. Like you'd hire marketing grads that had never done any ads on Facebook, for instance. So you start, asking, what are you actually learning? I remember interviewing, a developer years back that was learning Visual Basic. This was like 2016, maybe 2017. So the shocks were sort of, repetitive shock after shock. So as we started formally, researching and understanding what's happening in the sector, we were just shocked by the amount of student debt in the U.S., by even enrollment rates. Like many people don't know this, but something like only about a third of Americans actually have a college degree in 2021. So it's quite shocking when you even thinking of that. College debt's approaching maybe $2 trillion, maybe. The average American university is affordable to less than 1% of the world. Africa alone is going to face a shortage of about 100 million university seats a year over the coming 5 years, meaning that, there's a massive supply and demand mismatch. Markets like India, something like a third of faculty positions are vacant across universities in India. So the numbers just don't make sense. And, you have to ask yourself, how sustainable is this? And more importantly, what's the social impact? So unlike other industries where, there could be a poor customer service issue or an overpriced issue, you sort of skip like, food delivery app. I don't know, if food doesn't come fast enough, you'll be fine. But ultimately, the impact a lack of education has on the world, we think, is super profound. So that was the impetus behind starting Nexford.
Like I told you offline, I'm super excited to dive into this. I think this is a major problem that needs solving, and it's exciting that you and your team are working on this. It sounds to me like relevance is an issue. And just based on my own experience, I have $83,000 in student debt, which that's cringeworthy. And mainly because it was for a bachelor's degree in applied social sciences, which I don't use at all now. And this is so dumb, but at the time, I earned that degree. I was a detective in law enforcement, and this is so stupid, but I earned it so I would get an extra $1,500 a year in salary.
Wow.
So stupid. But I don't use it at all now. And then, so as I got into online business in something like 2014, I signed up for an MBA program, and I went in person and was enjoying it. Super expensive in Colorado. And then I took a class in online marketing. And what we were learning was taught by a teacher who had never actually done online marketing and was irrelevant to what I was currently practicing in my own business. It was outdated. And at that moment I stopped, and of course incurred more debt, but like I stopped because like there was a gap in relevance of what I was learning versus actual application. And then further, now I don't know if this experience is universal, but in my experience, when I was hired as a manager of this online business, and then I became a partner, but I literally did not include my MBA work because it was a deterrent for this person, this employer, because of the lack of relevance.
Right.
Is that part of what
you're spot on, Jim? I mean, when we pitched investors from day one, they asked us, what's the problem you're solving? We said, that we're solving two huge problems: relevance, number one, and affordability is number two. So the gap between what employers are looking for and what universities are teaching has only been widening over the past years. There's this massive gap. And I remember before we even came up with the name Nexford, we surveyed thousands of students all across the world. And then we surveyed administrators and faculty. It was a really interesting survey we did. So we asked faculty, administrative folks across universities, we said, what's the reason for your existence as a university? Like, what's your number one objective as a university? And then we asked students the same question. So, what's the number one reason you go to university? And that showed us what I call the disconnect between, and I know in the industry they don't really like when I use these terms, but the disconnect between the buyer and the seller. And it's such a unique disconnect, right? Because the buyer, in this case being the learner, the students going to college, and their number one reason was to get a job or advance in their career. Like hands down, it was like 80% of them said that. But only like 20% of faculty and administrators cited anywhere remotely close to preparing people for jobs. It was always sort of more theoretical, long-term stuff, providing people with foundations for life, or providing them, which has value. Don't get me wrong. Like, we're not a vocational school, and I think it boils down to this happy medium. There needs to be a medium. Universities need to teach people how to learn. I think predominantly that's the most important thing you can get from university, but that needs to be balanced with skills that can apply immediately. If I'm going to school for 4 years to learn how to learn, and I'm incurring, $100,000 or $150,000 in cost to do that, ultimately I still need to learn the skills. So it doesn't really take 4 years, to learn how to learn, and then I have to go get, say, professional certifications to become a digital marketer. If it was, a $3,000 6-month investment to learn how to learn, okay, that's fine. But when you're getting a degree, I think that today it's just skewed too much to the theoretical side. So we try to definitely balance between, and I think there needs to be this, like I said, this medium. There are soft skills, whether it's critical thinking or communication skills and so forth, which are the ones that employers value the most. But these need to be balanced again, or matched with practical skills, whether it's marketing or otherwise, and learning how to learn.
That makes sense. I want to play devil's advocate and push you a little bit.
Sure.
So I think some naysayers may say, what about credibility?
Yes.
What about reputation, even accreditation, et cetera? Now, my experience, as I just shared, has been for our company, we have 41 team members on our staff. A good number of them have degrees. I couldn't care less. I want to know if they can do the job that we're asking them to do, or if they're at a point where we can, complete that training to where they can do it. So if they have the requisite skills and they can prove that they have that, I don't care where they learned it, but I don't know if I'm in the minority. And if there's still, I know in days past, there was this idea you need to graduate from an accredited school, and even better if you're hiring in Denver, I'd like you to go to a Colorado school because that's my alma mater, I know it, or whatever. So how's that experience going for you all?
It's definitely an issue. So building a brand from scratch is difficult, let alone in higher ed specifically. It's an industry where people aren't used to seeing startups. Like, the concept of a startup university is a bit of an oxymoron. I mean, you don't really hear it all the time, right? So it takes time to build a brand. Having said that, the way we think about it is there's a number of factors into play. The first is if you actually look outside of the top university brands, the playing field is pretty much leveled across the board. So, outside, say there's 2,000 schools, for instance, in the US, outside the top 100, people wouldn't really have heard of the vast majority of the rest. I could probably name you, 5 universities right now, each of them billing $200-300 million a year that you'll never have heard of. So while it takes time to build a brand, ultimately we think that the consumers or demographic we're going after is one that's going to really leapfrog this sort of traditional mindset and understand that status quo isn't serving needs. People understand that today. It's just how willing am I to actually go with an alternative model, given I understand status quo isn't working. And once enough employers start, hiring our graduates or partnering with us, once enough learners, have gone through the program and, express their satisfaction and actually achieve, positive outcomes in life, I think there's going to be a bit of a tipping point where the new brand is not going to be a deterrent as much as it's actually going to be a catalyst to us, because ideally people want the best of both worlds. Like the ideal scenario is to actually be able to go to a college or university, get a degree, get an accredited degree, but also get a modern and affordable one. There's no one that would disagree to that, right? In the past, people would have to choose between the two. I either sort of go to a MOOC maybe and get a bunch of micro credentials online, but then from an employer perspective and even from a personal perspective, I don't really know what the value of that is. Or I have to pick the traditional university and learn theory and incur debt. So what we're saying is you should no longer have to make that trade-off. You can get the best of both worlds. We are accredited and we're applying for additional accreditations today, in the US. So ultimately, there will come a point where people will be able to evaluate us from a formal perspective, from a regulatory perspective, head to head with traditional folks that have existed for 50 years, and yet not have to suffer the consequences of universities that have existed for 50 or more years.
Sure. Is it inappropriate to compare what you guys are doing to coding boot camps, for example? I mean, those, in my observation, there's been a big rise in those sort of institutions or whatever. And I feel like that anecdotally, a lot of employers are hiring from them and are quite pleased because they have the requisite skill set. So what are your thoughts on that? So
I think there are some parallels. The differences would be primarily, a coding bootcamp, I think, is preparing you for a coding career, right? Now, there are different perspectives on the future of coding careers, right? There's a theory that one needs to respect, that it's likely that the coding skills you're going to build today are not going to be super valuable, say, 2 years from now. So what do you do at that point? If you don't have a foundation that allows you to pivot or to learn, something else, whether it's coding or something else, you're going to find yourself in trouble. So that's one perspective. Not to say that, coding isn't a great career, for the coming few years. So that's one perspective. The other perspective, I think, in coding bootcamps is, I think what really helped increase in popularity was the income sharing agreement structures. So the ISAs basically, I respect ISA as an alternative to the traditional tuition model. So I have a lot of respect for the model. Where I have an issue is in the concept of deferring an overpriced tuition structure. So let me explain what that means. So I think we need to come to terms with what is the actual value of what we are teaching people and assign a dollar value to that figure and find a way to deliver it at that actual value rather than find a way to defer the payment or come up with a creative financial engineering structure to charge 3 times that price over a number of years. Like, I'd much rather pay $2K today than $10K over 5 years, for example, right? So I think that's sort of the issue with ISAs and with all sorts of other alternative. It almost reminds me of mortgage-backed securities back in the day, right? Like, why are we trying to find creative ways to pay more than the real value? Let's just pay the actual value and call it a day, and you go your way, I go my way. I
agree. Yeah, that's good feedback. I want to read you a quote from a TechCrunch article that you all were featured in the summer of this year. It says, quote, after offering degrees, Nexford puts on its placement hat by fixing its graduates with partner employers. There's a big shortage of jobs in Nigeria, and despite the high unemployment, it's actually difficult to find extremely qualified entry-level graduates. So Nexford has carried out several partnerships where employers sponsor their employees or soon-to-be employees for upskilling and rescaling purposes. So tell me more about that, sort of the partnerships that you're forging with organizations. Sure.
So a great example is going to be, one of our most recent partnerships with a bank called Sterling Bank in Nigeria, one of the biggest banks there. So Sterling has, as with many other, traditional institutions, they'll have 2 challenges. You'll have one in that, upskilling and reskilling your own employees when it comes to things like, say, digital transformation or cybersecurity or product management skills. there's a huge shortage of these skill sets across traditional organizations. So they'll partner with us, identify where they have skill gaps, and then we'll look at our curriculum and say, okay, what within our curriculum can we match them with to fill those gaps. So that's one area of upskilling and reskilling. The other area, which I find quite exciting, is our Learn to Earn program. So you could draw parallels again from the ISA. So Learn to Earn programs where we go to an employer and say, do you have a shortage in hiring entry-level qualified talent? So as an employer, most employers are going through more traditional recruitment channels where they only actually get to know the applicant at point of application. Now, there are a number of drawbacks to that approach. So what we're saying is, through the Learn to Earn program, the employer can identify what are the skills that they value the most in entry-level candidates. So identify, say, 5 particular skills. I could choose a specific specialization within our bachelor program or a set of courses or certificates, and we match those academic programs to the qualifications and the skills the employer is looking for. So as an employer, I now know that graduates of Nexford are going to be specifically meeting the not the criteria even, but they're going to have the skills that I'm looking for, whether it's in a year or 2 or 3 or 4. And more importantly, I'm going to be able to actually monitor the progress of those learners over a certain period of time and potentially even offer them part-time positions while they're learning. So the employer is actually sort of building a relationship, say, for at least 6 months, prior to hiring them. So you have their academic, performance, but you also have sort of the virtual internships or the work that they've been doing for you on a part-time basis for 6 months. So you really are able to make a much more informed decision on who am I going to hire. So think of them as scholarship programs that are pipeline programs as well. And the interesting thing is, because our tuition is so affordable, so on average, say, our bachelor degree, if we're talking about a market like Nigeria, is going to cost less than $2,000 a year. So it's about $1,800 a year. So that's pretty much equivalent to the placement fee you are going to pay an agency anyway to find you someone. And that's someone just from scratch. You know nothing about them. So compare that in value versus I've educated that person. I've put them in a scholarship program. They've now done work that's relevant to what I'm looking for. And I have so much to analyze from day one. And they're really ready to hit the job from day one. I'm not going to have to put them through a training program. So that's basically what we're doing with employers through the Learn to Earn program. That's
fantastic. I love the built-in vetting as well. And this is probably a bit selfish, but this is actually quite useful for our organization, or could be. We provide outsourced customer support and back office support, and we hire something like 0.5% of all the applicants that come in. And it's tedious for us because, when we first bring on a client, there's a high risk in, we have to make a strong first impression. That's critically important. And we're hiring somebody that has not worked for us yet. And we do the best we can to vet them, but then we're putting them on the front line and they may or may not perform. Mm-hmm. So I love the idea of a vetting process being built in. And another thing we've considered, we predominantly hire out of the Philippines and Nairobi, Kenya, or just generally in Kenya. So that's our areas of focus. And one of the things that I would love to do, and I've talked to our Kenyan staff about this, is create kind of a quasi internship program. But for example, in just outside of Nairobi, there's one of the largest slums in the world called Kibera. Mm-hmm. And actually the English competency is quite good. What they're missing is the baseline skills that would be required to work remotely. Yeah. So we've talked about creating an educational program to upskill them, all the while, to your point, maybe they would work part-time, doing something internally for us, but then we have the vetting process. So I'm curious though, from our perspective, and this may be true or not for other employers, but timing is relevant. I wouldn't want to wait. It would be more difficult for us to wait 18 months to 2 years. I suppose that's workable if we plan for that. But it sounds like there's more accelerated options, almost like a job preparation certificate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there you could just take a course, for say 8 weeks. You could take multiple courses in parallel. You're right. I think the talent pipeline sort of solutions are going to be probably for large organizations that have, a history of recruitment. So they know on average we hire, 100 entry-level positions every year out of our 5,000, person workforce. Mm-hmm. So they partner with us to be the provider of that 100 for the coming years. But mm-hmm. on a shorter basis, say for startups or SMEs, there'd be much shorter courses people are looking for. And then from a B2C perspective, so to your point of, say the Philippines or other markets, and Philippines is one of our bigger markets, we have this view that the world's moving towards this virtual talent grid. So our approach to employability isn't just to match folks with employers specifically, because the idea is really what we want to do is enable economic mobility or social and economic mobility. So if I can get you on the grid, then we've achieved a really positive outcome. So we really think of it as literally sort of a grid. So that grid is a grid of talent all across the world. And there are employers on the grid, and there are, employees on the grid. There are contractors, there are freelancers, a whole bunch of people on that grid. So we think the future of employability in itself is going to change as well. Even if you were to think about it from your company's perspective, if you could today, tap into talent, tap in and out of it as you need in a sort of more fluid way, you could probably increase your efficiency significantly and even your productivity as well. So in a market like, whether it's the Philippines or in Kenya, where you have, great English speakers, you have young populations, contrary to the US, that's actually going to be an aging population over the coming 10 years. The only solution, I think, for companies in the US is actually going to be to tap into markets like Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia for future talent. And that talent doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of employment. So you look at platforms like Upwork and others.
Yes.
The reason these folks are growing is because there's just a need for more and more talent across the world. We want to get people on that grid to be able to access opportunities regardless of their location.
Absolutely. And we've seen, I'm sure you have too, an acceleration thanks to COVID. There's been more and more people that by force initially, companies that went remote. And that's sort of like the gateway, I guess, for them to consider working with people from other countries.
Exactly.
And the talent level that's available in other countries is incredible. But there's still, I know I was talking to Martin, one of our team leaders, and he's based in Nairobi. And he was saying there's such a huge gap there. Like locally, it's so difficult for people to find jobs. I mean, their local economy is pretty bad. Like the unemployment is extremely high. And the problem is there's a skill gap between, it's kind of been normalized to us because obviously all of our staff are of that skill level, but he said that actually they stand apart from the average and there's a major problem in upskilling people in that area. And internet infrastructure is improving significantly. And then at the same time, we have more and more employers willing to hire remote. I think that what you're providing is the missing component that's needed to get them in a place where they can be marketable to employers or just as a freelancer themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I hope so. And I think, COVID, like you said, sort of has accelerated, remote work. Employers are starting to realize, well, if everyone's remote anyway, if you're in Colorado and, you have an employee in DC or in Texas or in California, you might as well just have someone in Mexico as well. So I think that's been, amazing, really, in terms of enabling mobility across the world. And to your point on, freelancers, there's obviously a role for MOOCs and smaller credentials across the board, and we view ourselves as part of that ecosystem. But I'm starting to see that the smaller credentials are almost fueling the demand for formal credentialing, unlike what people thought. So you'd see all these Instagram posts that Google no longer requires a bachelor degree, and neither does Apple, and so forth. I think people sort of misconstrued that. It's not that they don't value a bachelor degree, but there's a disconnect between which ones they value and the price it entails and the salaries they have to pay when people are graduating with 100K in debt. But I assure you, whether it's Google or Apple or anyone else, if they could get college degrees, college graduates, with relevant skills, that's the best of both worlds, because no one wants to hire people and have to train them for 6 months before they can derive value from them. So anyway, to the smaller credential point earlier, there's just been, millions and millions of these, alternative credentials that have emerged over the past few years. And now I think the challenge employers are seeing is how do we evaluate what is the value of this, whether it's a badge or a certificate or a nano degree. It's really unclear what it means. So people are starting to go back to an extent to a college degree. At least I know sort of what is the baseline of what does a college degree actually mean. Yeah,
that makes sense. Do you have a network of graduates that are currently looking for positions that you kind of assist in placement for them?
We do, yeah. We started in Feb of 2019, so we do have MBA grads specifically, and we are just really designing, I have to say, in the early stages of designing our career services element or offering. We've partnered with a number of companies across the world. There's one called Localize, based here in DC as well. So we partner with them, to provide virtual job placement fairs, and they have regular weekly events with employers across the world. So we partner with existing platforms in addition to creating our own partnerships with employers to feed them with talent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to read a quote to you that's on your website. It's attributed to Dell, and it says 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't yet been invented. Mm-hmm. That's a profound statement, and I strongly agree. And it's funny, I have 5 kids total, and 2 of my girls are 14 and they're in high school, just starting high school. And we had an interesting conversation the other day about the current jobs that exist now were not even an option when I was their age, which it was not that long ago, but honestly, that's even true. Like 10 years ago, that's true. So how do you prepare for such a thing when we don't even know? I think we have a hint, I guess, at the direction things are going, but how do you prepare as a company to address that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Jim, and it's obviously something we think about all the time. And going back to my earlier feedback on sort of vocational skills or purely skills-based versus soft skills-based, this is where the balance, I think, comes in. So we know there are certain skills that are today in high demand, that are going to remain in high demand. So you think about things like communication skills, collaboration skills, critical thinking, strategic thinking, creativity. So these are skills that are definitely, in high demand today. Like across most research, you'll see that, the top skills employers value are going to come out of that list of 5 skills. So these are going to remain in high demand. The approach we try to take is what we call the interdisciplinary approach. So if we're teaching digital marketing, say, 50% of the course needs to focus on, applying digital marketing today. Like, this is how you can advertise on Google and Facebook and so forth. And then the other 50% needs to be focused on how you're going to select the platform and what's the thought process you should go through when you're thinking about, identifying your target audience and their personas and the concept of targeting and the concept of bidding and setting your budgets and how to measure return on that advertising investment and so forth. So these principles are going to remain. Now, you could say that, AI is going to replace, for instance, some of that, where it's going to target for you. Well, even if it does, you're still going to need to have the ability to analyze which of your target audience groups is, performing better than the other, and then tailor maybe your product offering for that. So that's what we think about it in an interdisciplinary way, where you're applying, say, creativity or analytical skills or strategic thinking skills to a digital marketing context. So that's where I think we win over some of the more targeted courses where you're just taking a digital marketing course to learn how to use, say, Facebook. If there isn't Facebook, in a couple of years, you're left not really understanding. I think finance is a great example as well. Like, we'll teach people how to understand, the return on their ad spend from an operational perspective. Is it actually driving sales or not? Attribution issues. So it's really about that interdisciplinary skill set, which is always going to be, I think, in high demand. Having said that, we obviously update our curriculum, much more regularly than traditional universities. So because it's completely online and because, we're really a tech-enabled institution, we continuously look at ways to actually build what we call a dynamic curriculum. So we're not going to update it every 5 years, right? We're going to update on a much shorter interval.
Could it be a different revenue channel for you, or a potential add-on revenue channel for you all to sort of update? Let's say you have a student that graduates this year, maybe in 1 year from now or 2 years, whatever time frame makes sense, they come back for sort of a refresher, maybe an update within their industry.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone's talking about lifelong learning these days, and we do attempt to do that in multiple ways, including our stackable credentials model. So you'll have many students who will come in for smaller credentials. So it could be just a course or a certificate. So what we've done is we've stacked all of our credentials within a larger sort of format, if you will. So if you think of it sort of as a pyramid, at the base of the pyramid, you may have a course and then a certificate and then a degree. So an example would be within our bachelor program, you could take 2 courses. Those 2 courses will constitute half a certificate. So once you're done with these courses, you'll get an email. It'll tell you, by the way, you've completed 50% of the certificate as well.
Nice.
So people might come in and take that. And then that folds into, you get an associate degree by default. When you're enrolled in a bachelor program, you'll get course badges, you'll get certificates, you'll get an associate degree, and then you'll get the bachelor program, all at no additional cost. So yes, I mean, people will be able to continuously come and tap into additional learning needs as they have them.
That's great. I want to shift gears here and talk about you a little bit more.
That's much less interesting.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We'll see. So 3 years ago or so, Raina Brightman gave you a referral on LinkedIn, and she said, quote, "He's a sharp brain, likes to throw a few curveballs to test the rigor of things, welcomes being challenged when it's to make the work the best it can be, and most importantly, can have fun in the process." So I'm curious, like, what are the curveballs that she's talking about with your style there?
So I don't remember that specific instant, but I have a tendency to, suggest things that may be very different from the path of thinking that's being taken. So let's say we're thinking about, a solution to a challenge. I'll throw a curveball, and is this even the challenge we should be thinking about in the first place? Or could there be a higher priority challenge that we should all be focused on? So everyone will be so focused, for hours thinking about option A, B, and C, and we're not able to solve the problem. But I just like to, think of things from different perspectives and pose all the different possibilities, even the unpopular ones. So I think that's often construed to be a curveball or an example of a curveball I'll throw in. I'm not afraid to really explore any option, I think is the best way to think about it. And I think often in doing so, you may resort to the first option you were thinking about in the first place, but you do so maybe with a higher level of confidence and often resolve.
Is another way of saying that kind of asking the question if the ladder is even leaning against the correct building? Right?
Yeah, I guess that's a great way to think about it.
How do you, I know for me, I get easily fixated, and I sometimes have a hard time seeing the forest for the trees. My angle is sort of not wide enough. And I don't know if that's a common experience. I think it probably is. But interestingly, in my past, I worked for a private equity firm. We acquired multiple SaaS assets, and I would review the prospectus. Mm-hmm. And regardless of my expertise in that specific niche, I could usually add some sort of value by looking at the business from a 30,000-foot perspective. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like in most cases, the founder was just right here.
Exactly.
And so how do you do this? Like, how do you open your view up?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's really difficult when you're so entrenched in operations and deadlines and budgets, and the last thing you want is someone coming and giving you some hypothetical scenario to, it's sort of aggravating actually, So I have to say, I rely on partners for that to a large extent. Several of our investors are really good at that. My co-founder as well, though he's not actively involved in running the business. Let's say we'll speak, whatever. Let's say if we do like a monthly review session, whether formally or informally, he'll always, challenge me. So I guess the short answer is you need to expose yourself to those who will complement your weaknesses. I've found that to be maybe the lazy solution to fixing my own weaknesses, exposing myself to those who don't have the weaknesses.
I don't even know that it's appropriate to say it's a lazy solution, because there's an argument to be made that it's not worth your effort to focus on your weaknesses or improving those versus doubling down on your strengths.
Yeah.
Especially when you're at a stage where you have the privilege of putting the right person in the right seat at your startup. And I know that is a privilege, and we're just on the edge of that now. And it gets me excited because in the beginning, I feel like as a founder or a team of founders, you have to kind of do everything, including stuff you're not great at.
You're right, 100%. And I think it's all about timing, right? Whether you follow, the U.S. Army says reinforced success, right? When you read, blitz scaling, again, it's really about the stage of the business. I think at an early stage, like you said, if the whole team is, 5-10 people, you don't have the luxury of saying, I have these weaknesses, let me have someone else fill them. But I think as the business grows, like you said, there's just an opportunity cost. You could say, I'm going to take 3 to 6 months to work on myself to address this particular issue. Or, so-and-so just does it much better than I do. So I think it just starts with identifying that it is a weakness. If you can't see that in the first place, I think that's where the bigger risk is. And again, I think surrounding yourself by folks who poke at things and also aren't involved as operationally as you are, they tend to see things that you didn't see. And these may not be weaknesses, by the way. Often, they're actually opportunities that you weren't looking at.
Yeah. Strength is so relevant too. It's like, so until very recently, well, I think it's fair to say we're still in the transition where I'm stepping out of operations more into like the sales sort of relationship side of the business. And I'm pretty high in trait conscientiousness, attention to detail. And I thought I was fairly good at that. And then we have this lady in our team named Joanne, and she has the attention to detail, like, can't even imagine. I'm like, she's way better at this than me. It's like what I thought was my strength, and maybe it was compared to some, but it's like she's way higher in that. Yeah. Like, to give you an example, she sent us a message. This was like last week, and she goes, "Hey guys," to David and I, my co-founder and I, "Hey guys, want to remind you that in 1 hour from now in Kenya is Jeff's 1-year anniversary if you want to wish him well." I'm like, and she's in the Philippines. So like she's calculating what time it is in the US and she's like,
incredible.
I was like loosely aware that Jeff's anniversary
was coming up. What did you say her name was?
Joanne.
Okay, let me just Google Joanne Philippines. Yeah. Sounds like a catch.
Yeah, we're going to delete this. No, but it's like, it was humbling to me, and I felt so proud of her. And this is just one story. Like, we have multiple people on our team that have stepped up, and it's like, this is amazing. Like, it's just great to have the fortune of working with people like that.
Honestly, Jim, you're right 100%. Like, my biggest regret always in every startup, including Nexford, was just not prioritizing HR sufficiently from day one. I think, it is the number one sort of mislooked, undervalued area probably of any startup that I've seen. Like, if you build the right team and you really invest in finding the right folks and then nurturing the right team, there's nothing that's just more empowering. There's nothing, that I could say, would impact the success of your business more than that. And, often as founders, we're just so, busy and just focused on execution that we tend to do a lot ourselves for the first few years, more than we should. But also focus on surrounding yourselves with folks that can execute on your vision. But then years later, you find that they don't have their own vision or their own view of how things should be built. And therefore, you're left, with an organization that doesn't really move unless you push it. So to your point, 100%, I would say, focusing on getting the right people is just by far the most valuable thing any entrepreneur can do. I think once we cross like 20 people, 30 people, many people would start telling me, maybe you shouldn't be interviewing everyone. And then I tell myself, I think I should actually still interview everyone until we're over 100. Like right now, we're probably about 70 people. Okay. And I really don't think, founders should stop interviewing and be, so involved with hiring until they're really comfortable that the culture is really aligned internally. Everyone understands what are the values you're looking for and so forth. Because again, like in our businesses, at least, right, they're knowledge businesses. It all boils down to the team you have.
Yeah. Yes. I'm constantly trying to balance my fear of letting go too soon versus my fear of letting go too late. Yeah. That's hard for me, at least, to balance that, because it's a shame to carry on too long and not let go of something sooner, but yet there's a risk in doing that too soon as well. Agreed. Obviously.
It's a constant dilemma I think most founders face.
I'm curious. I would like to talk a whole nother hour on that topic alone, but I think I'll move on. That's so fascinating. I feel like if I open that can, we're gonna be on there for a long time. So I'll move on from that. But I appreciate that share. I'm curious, like, how often do you feel a sense of accomplishment at the end of your day?
At the end of my day, I'd say if it's a good week, it'll be once a week.
And why? Like what determines, because I know there's an endless to-do list, but
Yeah.
what determines if you feel a sense of, I guess, joy/accomplishment at the end of your day?
I think it's really outcome based. Like I find it very difficult to feel a sense of accomplishment based on output as opposed to outcome. And it's just difficult to achieve outcomes on a daily basis. Like projects don't complete themselves in a day. But it's about perspective. Like we have other team members that I'm sure feel much more accomplished. But I guess you get to sort of a stage, I don't know, in life or in your first sort of founder journey where the simple metrics you sort of start realizing that they're false indicators of success. So let's say someone will say, yeah, we're on track for, growth of whatever, X% this month. In your mind, well, we're also on track for decline. You know what I mean? Like, what does on track mean? So there's all these different false indicators. And I think the world just becomes so volatile and the rate of change is just very fast that personally, and I don't know how you feel about that. I sense of accomplishment I really derive primarily from outcomes that are concrete as opposed to traction towards a goal.
I do too, but I don't really want to, because there's a lot that is outside of my control. I'm trying to find peace with doing my very best. Also, not like subjectively. Like, I mean, my wife and I get along very, very well, but occasionally we have disagreements, or my kids are teenagers and they're struggling with something. It's like my best day by day changes. And I'm trying to find a sense of contentment with that. And the reason why is because I recognize to see the value of compounding, you have to play the long game. You have to run the marathon.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned your wife, and I was thinking of my wife while answering this question, because often she says that, you don't seem happy, and then like one day I'll be very happy. So she's like, I'd like to see you happy more consistently. I'm like, well, I'd like that too, but it is what it is. And I remember a team member, telling me, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you have to think of it that way. And as a founder, I guess the stakes are also very high. So you're always thinking to yourself, often I think to myself, what is the value of a day? Like in dollar terms and even in other terms. So when you think to yourself, okay, whatever, we spent $50K today. So if you try to match that against, your outcomes, you're like, what did you accomplish stuff worth of $100K? If you did, then it's awesome. But if you accomplish stuff worth of 30, it means you just lost 20K today. So I guess it's difficult, really, if you try to quantify it. It's very difficult to achieve on a short interval. You have to look at it on a longer term basis. Yeah.
Do you feel like you're running the marathon versus a sprint?
I feel like I'm running 5 different sprints concurrently at any given point.
Has that been true since you were 18, or does that ebb and flow, like where it's a series of sprints?
It ebbs and flows, but it ebbs and flows in terms of the number of sprints, not the concept. Like it goes from like 2 sprints to 20 sprints, but it's always like parallel sprints.
My co-founder and I had a sync yesterday, and we were talking about like our own challenges, and like I think we're both a little bit off. Like I honestly may even be somewhere on the Asperger's spectrum. It's like, and probably David is too. But like we were joking, like you've got to be a little crazy to do 100%. This, because like the potential negative outcome or the risk of negative outcome is high. Yeah. I don't know. There's just got to be something a little bit different about entrepreneurs.
100%. And that's the weird part. And, in explaining it to say, your wife, it's so difficult, really. And I think, like, honestly, wives don't get enough credit in startup world. They are the backbones, it's sort of wives followed by, all the rest. But yeah, we had a webinar, I remember a few months ago, the author of this book called Why Startups Fail. So we hosted him on the webinar. We were talking about statistics, right? The failure rates and so forth. And like you said, like the odds are against you. And depending on, the audacity of sort of your idea, your concept, you definitely have to be a little bit, I don't want to say obnoxious, but arrogant to believe that you're going to beat the odds and you're going to do what other people weren't able to do and so forth. So across the board, you can't be 100% normal and keep on going at it. When you're a founder and your bank account doesn't have enough money for your payroll 2 weeks down the line, but you're still hiring people, like that's unusual behavior, right? But people do these things and ultimately they become success stories, or abnormal behavior rather. So you have to be a bit abnormal, and I think you have to recognize that you are, but not be arrogant about it.
It's such a weird recipe of traits that are needed.
It is super weird. And honestly, do you ever think about the concept itself of startups? Because in itself, it's weird. Like, what's wrong with profitable, family-owned businesses growing at decent rates, growing whatever, 20% a year, 10% a year? Like, why is it that those are out of fashion?
I don't know. Yeah, it's like, and so many people have this view of entrepreneurship like it's sexy. It's like, it's freaking hard. The reason entrepreneurs can earn an endless potential of money is because they add value at a larger and larger scale and bear responsibility. Like, I left the office on Friday. One of my main problems is I internalize the responsibility to employ my team. Like, our mission is to create 10,000 highly autonomous remote jobs in 10 years. Like, I'm serious about that. But there are days where I feel like something is shaky with a client or whatever, where I bear that responsibility. And I know it's not just completely up to me, but it's hard, man. Like, it's a weight to bear.
It is.
But to your point, I think that it's wise to define goals and expectations, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with a small family business that grows 10 or 20% year over year. And honestly, that's a better fit for a lot of people. I don't think we should overly glamorize, large funded startups versus I wish I could attribute this properly. Oh, darn. Who was it? I listened to a podcast where somebody said, look, I don't think that Elon Musk is working any harder than the restaurateur that owns 3 local restaurants. Probably maybe even the opposite.
Yeah. Very true. It's very true. And yeah, that book, I mean, they were making a case actually for the fact that, VC funded startups have a much higher failure rate than non-VC funded startups. And yet, it's the recipe that sort of everyone's going after now. And that in itself, oftentimes I look back and I question whether that is the right recipe one should continue pursuing.
Well, some businesses just need that. Like, I think of network effect businesses.
Yeah.
There's no way that they could exist apart from significant funding.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other topic, though, maybe for another session. But I have major issues with, business models that have no path to profitability. Or at least like an obscure sort of 30-year path. Like, what the hell? I don't think that's cool, and I think that's a dangerous path to pursue.
100% with you. Well, dang, our time has flown by. Yeah. I do want to end with one more question, and it can be quick. But I'm curious, in all of your experience, what advice you would give to yourself if you went back and talked to yourself and picked the time frame, 10 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago, what you would say?
If I could pick 20 years ago, I would probably have told myself, follow a traditional college path, meaning like don't start working in high school, enjoy yourself, have fun, and then work will happen when you graduate.
Yeah. Well, it's not too late. You can make it take a little sabbatical, take a little break, and go on vacation with your wife.
Take my 2 daughters and go.
That'd be nice. Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. You've been very gracious. This has been a fun conversation. We will have links to Nexford as well as to your LinkedIn on our landing page.
Awesome.
The university website is Nexford, nexford.org if you want to check it out. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, say hello, or certainly if they're interested in learning more about the university?
I guess LinkedIn. Yeah,
perfect.
That's probably the easiest.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time, Fadl. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jim.